So today we are going to be talking about simplicity, inspiration, and truth. How to write a brilliant creative brief. We are going to be looking at the three essential ingredients of a great brief. We're going to be looking at some common mistakes and how to avoid them, compelling insights and where to find them, how to craft a single-minded proposition. It's one of the toughest tasks of all, I think, when it comes to brief writing. We'll talk a little bit towards the end about the brief versus the briefing, and this is all going to be about how to write briefs that creatives actually want to read. And there will be some time at the end for questions. It's 1:05 here in South Wales. This will take no more than an hour, and we should have a good amount of time for questions before then. Is everybody okay there in the chat? Come on, somebody. Yes, John's good. Kerry's good. Richard's good. Let's begin. So I'm going to start with a question. Does anybody recognise who this is? Guesses in the chat, please. I'm going to give you a clue. It's you in the 80s. I wish. It's somebody who's been responsible for some of the greatest pop tunes of all time. Nick Drake, good guess, Emma. Nick Drake looks a bit like Nick Drake. Alas, no, it's not Nick Drake. One of the guys from the Monkees. Good guess, Sam. I'm going to give you a clue. Here he is with his partner. Bernie, Nicky, yes, Bernie. Richard, Bernie. Yeah, it's Bernie Taupin. So for those of you who don't know, this guy on the left is Bernie Taupin. Every Elton John song, the lyrics were written by Bernie Taupin. Bernie Taupin writes the lyrics, he sends them to Elton, Elton writes the tune. Without Bernie, there would be no Tiny Dancer, no Candle in the Wind, none of that. Bernie is essential to Elton's process. And for me, I think Bernie is the brief and Elton is the ad, you know? Elton, the ad, gets all the plaudits and the awards and the spotlight, but there would be no ad without a great brief. The brief is the unsung hero of the creative process. Behind every great creative project, although you might not know it, there's usually a great brief. One of the classics is this. It's the Coca-Cola bottle design brief from 1915. The brief was very simply a bottle so distinct that it could be recognized by touch in the dark or when lying broken on the ground. Beautiful. And as we'll see, a great brief does not have to be long. I bet you weren't expecting an ancient Greek playwright and poet to turn up in this. This is Euripides, and Euripides said that a bad beginning makes for a bad ending. And I suspect Euripides had never written an advertising brief, but his observation is absolutely true in the context of this afternoon. And here's the thing. There was a survey done, they do them annually, it's the Better Briefs organisation. They do a really nice deck that's worth checking out. And in the 2022 survey, they produced this statistic. 80% of marketeers think they're good at writing briefs, and only 10% of agencies agree. So there's this sort of huge discrepancy. And I think part of the problem is that people who write briefs rarely been taught how to do it. They've really sat through a webinar on the 1st of March. And so they learn by reading the briefs that are out there. And most briefs are bad, so they write bad briefs because all they've seen are bad briefs, and we end up in this sort of negative vortex. Common issues. They are underthought, overcomplicated, poorly written, too long, predictable, repetitive, not single-minded, and Kevin has already anticipated me here, a cut and paste from last year. Yeah, man. Oh, don't do it, you know. There's no point. There's no point. Today, Friday, is very different from yesterday. Things change all the time. Cut and paste from last year, and you are doing yourself, your creative team, and your brand a disservice. Sir John Hegarty, one of the founders of BBH, a great London-based advertising agency. We'll return to him later on, but he said writing bad briefs is the most expensive way of writing advertising. And really, a bad brief is worse than no brief at all. So what is a brief? Well, really simply, it is a description of a problem which invites a solution. That's it. It's no more complicated than that. And Jeff Goodby, the founder of Goodby Silverstein, US agency, says the brief is like a fisherman's guide, a person who takes you to the best place on unfamiliar water, shows you where to fish, and offers ideas about the best bait to use. The guide doesn't fish, but makes sure that the fisherman has a more successful time than they would have had on their own, which is quite a nice way of putting it, I think. Sam asks, can we add auto-generated by AI to this list soon? I think we probably will end up doing that, alas, Sam. So for me, I see the brief as sitting in the middle. It's kind of the bridge between strategy and creative. It comes between the two. It connects those two very important things up. So strategy is the reason we're doing this as a brand. The brief is the reason it matters to our audience. We turn our gaze to the outside world. And creative is how we are going to make our audience care. So really a brief is a blend of both these things. It's a compelling blend of incisive strategic thinking brought to life with creative flair. And it's rare to encounter a brief that gets the balance of those two things absolutely spot on. We'll talk about how complex and confusing various brief formats can be, but at its heart, there should be three essential ingredients in any brief: who, what, and why. The third of these being the most important. Who are we talking to? What are we telling them? And most importantly of all, why should they care? It's said that we are subjected to around 10,000 commercial messages every single day. Almost all of them, they wash over us. They don't even penetrate our consciousness. So what is it about the thing you have to say that matters to the audience? Why should they give a fuck when their lives are so busy and they are so time poor? Another common error of briefs is that sometimes they will go into the how, and I think it's okay if you, as the person writing the brief, have a sense of how this could be achieved creatively, but don't share it in the brief. Allow the creatives to surprise you, to come up with something greater than you could have ever envisaged. Time for a little commercial break. I'm going to play a few of my favorite ads this afternoon. This one is from a few years back, and it's an ad for the British charity Childline.
When you were before, could look you in the eye, just like an angel. Your skin makes me cry, but I'm a creep.
Thanks, Sarah. I love it too. It's beautiful. So in the context of this commercial for Childline, who are we talking to? Well, we are talking to British school-age kids. What are we telling them? Very simply, we're saying you're not on your own. And why should they care? Well, because it's really easy as an adult and particularly as a kid to assume that no one feels the way you do. Who, what, why? As a creative, I'm looking for three qualities in any brief that I read. The first is truth, the second, simplicity, and the third is inspiration. And I would like to unpack all of these a little bit now, if I may. So let's begin with truth. When it comes to communication, commercial communication, to advertising and branding and design, your most powerful tool isn't, despite what some marketers would tell you, segmentation studies or psychographic profiles. It's the truth. Real lives lived in the real world. And I think it's easy sometimes for brands and marketing departments to become cloistered and very introspective and to forget about all the stuff that's happening outside of the building. But unless you are intimately plugged into that, you can never be intimately plugged into something. You need to be careful plugging into something intimately. But if you are intimately plugged into it, then you are more likely to be successful. 3 years ago, this ad ran in a local paper in Detroit. It's an ad for a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. I can't pretend like everything is okay. Gun fetishes are being prioritized. Women are no longer in control of their own bodies. The earth is heating up. Black and brown people are still being killed, brutalized, or otherwise harassed. Honestly, at this point, who gives a shit about HVAC? But if you're hot, give us a call. All Star Mechanical Heating and Cooling. Boom, the truth, right there. It's got this kind of scorching power to it. It looks and reads unlike any ad from any heating, ventilation, and air conditioning ad you will ever see. It's done by an extraordinary guy, written by the guy who owns the company, a guy called Larry Kershing. Worth checking out. There's an extraordinary power in the truth. I have often said, and those of you who have attended some of my masterclasses or webinars have often said that a great piece of communication is a simple truth told in a surprising way. We present something to the audience in a way that they've not seen or heard before. But in order for this to work, you need that truth. What is that truth? In Denmark, in Copenhagen, they've raised the benches 85 centimeters in the center of town to illustrate the 1 meter rise in sea levels that will occur if we do nothing about climate change before the end of the century. A simple truth told in a surprising way. It's an extremely powerful combination. In the context of briefs, as many of you will know, another word for truth is insight. What are the most powerful insights you can draw on for your brief? Here's an insight for you. Any of you who've gone through the experience of buying a house can perhaps relate to this. Certainly one in 10 of you will. 1 in 10 couples find getting a mortgage so stressful that it has a negative impact on their sex life. There is a really exciting, fast-growing, innovative brand in the UK, financial services company called Habito, and their work looks like work unlike any other financial services company, which is one of the reasons why the brand is growing so quickly. They found this statistic as part of their research, and they used it to create the mortgage Kama Sutra. 1 in 10 couples say that getting a mortgage made their sex lives hell. Habito finds you the best deal so you can focus on the fun stuff. And this mortgage Kama Sutra has positions like the standing variable rate, the first time buyer, and the base rate bridge. A rather innovative way of appealing to young couples who are about to get their first mortgage. Where do you find insights? Well, you can look outwards into the lives of your audience. Social listening is a really good technique. Look at how people are discussing or interacting or talking about your brand online. You can look inwards to the unique attributes of your product or service. What are the things that make your brand, your product, your service different to anybody else's? And they could be good or bad, as we'll see. Or you can look around you at your competitive set. What other people are doing? How can you play it a bit differently? Habito works because most people who are selling mortgages do exactly the same kind of stuff. You know, it's like really mundane, happy couples and sort of live action and soft focus, and it's just boring. And they deliberately play against that, disrupt those conventions. The most valuable insights are, in my experience, those the creatives couldn't have guessed before they read a brief. You know, it's brilliant when you're a creative and you get the brief and you go, oh, wow, right. I didn't know. I didn't even think about that, the impact of mortgages on sex lives. And as soon as you've got that little sort of spark, that little vein of vitality running through the brief, as a creative, then you can go to town, you can have a lot of fun. Another category of insights that are often really good are the ones that feel a little bit uncomfortable first. You know, when you come up with it, but you go, should we really be talking about that? Marmite has famously done this again and again with great results over a quarter of a century. For those of you not in the UK, Marmite is a yeast-based vegetable extract, which for many people is as disgusting as that sounds. I've kind of come around to the way of Marmite, largely due to living with my wife for 20 years, but that's another story. Here is one of my favorite Marmite ads, and it's based on an insight which could have scared off many other lesser brands. You know, 50% of people hate Marmite, 50% of people love it. Let's take a look at the ad. This ad is for the Marmite Genome Project.
Yes! They're here!
This should be interesting.
Please find enclosed the results of your family's recent Marmite gene tests.
These show whether you were born a lover or a hater.
What does it say?
You're a hater?
Dad,
Yeah.
I need to tell you something. I'm a Marmite lover.
I thought you said I hated it, and this says I love it. What type of mother does something like that?
But baby,
Oh my goodness, I am so stupid.
I prefer jam.
I'm carrying a hater's baby!
It's basically killing my childhood!
Oh, sweetheart.
Come here, son. You don't care.
Oh, we just want you to be happy with who you are.
Have you ever done it here? In this house?
Yes. I only did it to make you happy.
Do I look happy? On this table?
Yes.
Oh,
Baby, please
I don't hate Marmite, I hate you!
I can learn. Look.
Get in, all lovers.
I hate it! I hate it!
He's never even tried it.
Brilliant. What a beaut. Nice to see the reactions in the chat there too. Yeah, it's great. I have a Marmite story to do with my wedding, which some of you may have heard, but I'll maybe share that at the end if we have time. Right, on from Marmite and my wedding. The more insightful your insights, the better your brief will be. The second characteristic of a great brief is simplicity. So, question to you out there, my friends, how long should a brief be? What do we think? Answers in the chat. Karina says 1 page. Sam says 1 page. Sarah says a side of A4. Malky 1 page. Alexander says he's going in hard. Alexander, I like your style. 1 sentence. Elena says whatever's needed. Peter's coming in at just 3/4 of a piece of A4. Emma hedging her bets with depends. Jack, brief, yes. Emma depends on project and budget. As short as possible, but long enough to deliver the salient facts. Andre, 5 pages. Are you sure? Nikki, shorter the better, but varies. Yeah, I would say and I've had a bit longer to think about this than you have. Not a word longer than it needs to be. Yeah, I agree. I think a page is a good thing to aim for. It could just be a single sentence. There are very rare occasions where you may need to go to 2 pages, but I have to say I would not go up to 5. I'll explain why. The simpler the brief, the better the creative is going to be. There's we return to John Hegarty of BBH. This is a clip from a much longer interview I came across with him talking about briefs and the Bible. Kevin says, yeah, the clue's in the title. Brief, absolutely, it's called a brief. John Hegarty on simple briefs.
Best brief for short. Because I was thinking about this, and it's like, I'm an atheist and a proud atheist, but I'm always fascinated by people who are, believe in Christianity and the Bible, and they all pick out the bits that they want.
Yes.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Thou shalt not kill. It says in the. So they've all got bits of it. They go, and briefs, if they're long, become like that because people read them and they go, oh yeah, but here
That's
it
the bit
says,
I want. That's the bit I'm
here
going to
that
focus
I'm
on.
focused on.
Yeah.
And you go, no. That was I just put that in because I thought.
Yeah.
So the less in there, the better. What is it? This is what I want you to do.
The one thing it must do is this, right? Yeah,
All right?
exactly.
That's
Then-
it. Because it can only do one thing. If it's brilliant, then other things will ripple out from it.
Yeah.
But that's its job.
Thanks for your question, Andre. I will be answering that in just a second. So I would risk having not enough information rather than too much. Your creatives can always come and talk to you, or the agency can come and talk to you if they need more information. But I err on the side of putting less information in rather than too much. Strategy is sacrifice. It requires you to discard the unimportant things and amplify the important ones. A great brief is everything you need and nothing you don't. Some people, I'm one of them, like background to a project. I like to read research materials and I like to watch focus groups. I'm a bit weird like that because as a creative, I find that all that sort of material informs my creative process. So if you have that stuff, then you can offer it to the creatives. They might want it, they might not, but don't put it in the brief. The brief is that simple, most elegant way of expressing the challenge as you can make. And as soon as you start putting in all the other stuff, it gets kind of woolly and complex and unhelpful and destined to fail. Is there a perfect brief template? No, there really isn't. And even the best agencies will change their brief templates every few years. This is the BBH template. So we've heard from Hegarty a couple of times now. And it's nice, I think, as you would hope it would be, given what he's just said. And so you've got a product truth, brand difference. What is the business problem? What is the role of communication? Who is our audience? What engages them? What exactly do we want them to do? What is the single thing to communicate? Why should people believe and be interested in this? What will success look like? And where is the zag in this zig? Notice who, what, why. All there. Things that you should consider putting in your brief is the context and the background and the environment into which this thing is happening. The task specifically, what are we doing? Who do we want to engage? Why should they care? What do we want them to think, do, say, or feel? What is the behavior or the emotion we're looking to generate? What's our objective? Financially, brand tracking, whatever it is, how we're going to measure it. What's our single-minded message? The one thing we want to say. Where will we talk to our audience? How much time and money do we have? It's funny how often people miss that off a brief. And then the brief in brief. I think it's really important that somewhere in that brief, the whole thing is distilled down into a single sentence that you can drop at the top, drop at the tip of a hat. That's wrong too. You know what I mean? Something that rolls off the tongue quickly in an environment like a coffee shop queue or a lift. Some of you will have come across this. It's a really neat formula for getting to a brief really quickly. And if all you have time to do is this, then do this. Get who to buy. So get the audience who have a problem, dream, or challenge to think, feel, or do something by sharing one message, and that message is the single-minded proposition. And we'll come to how you find it in a second. So get who to buy. Let's have another commercial break. This is another brilliant ad. This one is part of ITV's mental health campaign, Britain Get Talking.
Welcome back, everyone. Next to Race the Chase, it's Sue. Welcome to the show, Sue.
All right.
Here.
Fancy a cuppa?
Sure.
How was the dreaded school?
It was all right.
There you go. What about that girl, Sophie? You spoken to her yet?
No, but it's whatever.
So it doesn't bother you?
No, not really.
Okay. Look, you know you can talk to me, right? I'm here.
Actually, Dad, it's just that anytime I go over to her, she doesn't talk to me or she walks away, and then I've been messaging.
Powerful ad with an important purpose from the agency Uncommon. And yeah, I agree, Anna, the performances are exceptional. It's so elegantly directed, isn't it? It just feels completely naturalistic and extraordinarily powerful. So let's take that as our example then. So we want to get parents and carers who have struggling teenage kids to take time out for meaningful conversations about mental health by showing that kids don't always say what they're really feeling. Get who to buy. 4-line brief. Let's now talk about the most important sentence on the brief, which is the single-minded message or the single-minded proposition or the brief in a nutshell or whatever you choose to call it or whatever your brand or agency calls it, but it's that encapsulation of the brief in an absolute quintessence. It's the one most important thing that you want to say. Balls, my friends. Yeah, so if I were to chuck a load of balls at you, then you wouldn't catch any, most likely. If I throw one ball at you, then you'll catch it, most likely. And so it is with briefs, you know. If you throw a bunch of different ideas at your creatives, then they just, you know, they're all over the shop trying to catch balls. Throw one, boom, they've got it. Here's a clip of there's quite a nice film on Vimeo. I'm gonna talk about it at the end, show you where to find it at the end. But it's all about briefing, and here's a lovely illustration of a fantastic single-minded proposition.
Well, the brief sparks something. Probably, you know, the one that we'll always talk about the most is the 1996 Olympics for Nike. And we'd been stumbling for a while and trying to come up with the work and come up with the brief and so forth. But then finally, sport is war, minus the killing. So that was the brief. And that set the tone. Now, that was backed up by a summer long of interviews that we've done with the athletes where we knew, not just intuitively or instinctively, but we knew for a fact how they felt in their hearts about competition. And the brief is what gave us the kind of the guideposts in terms of the mood and the kind of work that we created. When you say sport is war, minus the killing, there's a certain tone in there. And if you look at the 96 work for Olympics, It was pretty controversial. It wasn't just marketing speak, and it wasn't just creative for the sake of being cool or being creative. It spoke from the heart of the athlete. And so the tone was very aggressive. And that brief helped to set that tone.
Boom. Sport is war minus the killing. That is the kind of single-minded proposition as a creative I can get behind. So great single-minded proposition is single-minded, obviously. It's rooted in a compelling truth. We've spoken about truths. It's motivating to the audience and it's inspiring to the creatives. Tick all those 4 boxes and you have a wonderful single-minded proposition. How do you find it? Well, here's a trick. Imagine you've gone for a beer with your creative director. You're writing a brief. I'm assuming you're a marketeer, but maybe you're another creative, whatever. You've gone for a beer with somebody who's supposed to be working on a project. You have a beer, you don't talk about the project. You have another beer, you talk about office gossip. You have another beer, you talk about a great movie you saw last week, Zone of Interest by Jonathan Glazer. If you've not seen it, go see it. And then you go get a train home and you go together to the platform, but they're going one way, you're going the other way. Their train arrives first. They jump on board just before the doors are about to shut. You think, oh, fuck, we were supposed to talk about the brief. What is the one thing you shout before the train doors close? Boom. That's your single-minded proposition. Inspiration. Dave Trott, the advertising legend, some of you may follow on the socials. If you don't, he's worth following, I would say. A brief is not about writing, it's about thinking. Oh, yes. Don't begin writing until you've finished thinking. So often I receive a brief and I can tell the person writing the brief was kind of working it out as they wrote it. This is no good. It should be worked out and then you begin writing. I think a great brief is a bit like a slinky, you know? And it's going down through a series of steps, and no step is bigger than any previous step. And you're going, yep, 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 and it all kind of flows, got a beautiful flow to it, and there are no big jumps. That is a good way to think about how to structure your brief. And it allows me to show a clip of a slinky, which is mesmerizing, as I hope you'll agree. Write with ambition, passion, and conviction. This shouldn't be a stale document. It should be an exciting one. Use emotion. Describe feelings. Be evocative. Employ the power of active verbs. Verbs like excite, convince, inspire, reassure, compel, empower, encourage, and motivate. Words which suggest we're going to really achieve something out there in the real world. Never, as we've established, cut and paste. ABC1, CRM, USP, C2DE, KPI, UX, UE, RTB, ROI, CTM, CTA. These are all things I've culled from briefs I've had. It's jargon, it's kind of helpful if you're a marketeer talking to other marketeers, but don't put it on the brief, man. It's a creativity killer. Avoid jargon, ditch the data. This is about human beings out there in the real world. So let's talk about them like they're human beings. Little trick you can try is you try writing to someone you know. So think of a friend in the creative department. Imagine you're writing to them. And that hopefully will get rid of all the sort of bureaucratic marketing nonsense that you might write. Kevin says, don't say go viral. Yeah. Above all, don't say that. Sam says, write to your mum if you want to keep it warm and friendly. I nearly said simple, but that would be a terrible disservice to mums. I only mean because mums presumably don't work in the same industry. And don't say be disruptive, Eleanor, either. Yeah, these are hollow things. So who are we talking to? This is from a brief that I had the misfortune to be given. I've redacted the brand name to X. Sport fans with an interest in motorsport, 3.03 million. Without export, 770k. Pay prospects without export, 680k. / free prospects, 1.6 million. Huh. I was no clearer after reading that than you are. It's almost absolutely unhelpful. Your audience are not demographics. They are human beings. This is a photo of the window in Ben Territt's office. Ben is the person responsible for designing the British government website and the one that citizens use. And he scratched out the covering on his window so he could look down at people in this street outside the coffee shop below and remind himself while he was working on this project that these were his users, real, regular people in the everyday world. To think about their lifestyle, their attitude, their mindset, consider their dreams, their challenges, their hopes and fears. Paint them with words if you can. Let's say you've got to write a brief to launch a new ginger shop. It's like a healthy thing that gives you a bit of zip. There it is. I've just drafted this, as an example of how you might describe your audience. Who are we talking to? Men and women between 30 and 50 who are always running to catch up. They juggle stressful jobs, a busy family life, social obligations, etc. Despite always feeling exhausted, they do very little about it. The problem seems too big and burdensome to solve. So they reach for a bar of chocolate or another large coffee and carry on. Yet deep down, they know they could be living a healthier lifestyle. If there was a simple, everyday, healthy solution to fatigue, they'd listen. Great, I'm there. I understand who we're talking to, what they're motivated by. I understand what their issues are. I understand where they want to get to. And it's all couched in really easy to understand everyday language. Every word on your brief should count. It should be doing something. It should be adding to the understanding of your audience, like any great piece of writing. When you think you're done, stick your document in Word, do a word count. If it's 1,000 words, lose 100. Always lose 10%, and it will make your brief 30, 40, 50% better. And when you think you're really done, when you've done that, you've lost some and you've checked it for jargon and you've gone through, read it aloud. And you will notice things when you read it aloud that you didn't when you were reading it in your head. And if you can, give it the overnight test. Always with any piece of writing, create just a little bit of space between you and the writing. When you come back, you'll go, oh, wow, that's not so clear. Or I'd forgotten to put that in. Or there'll just be something that enables you to make it better. Finally, the brief in brief. So somewhere on your brief, I think it's really helpful to have an encapsulation of the whole brief, not just a single-minded proposition, but the whole brief. And this is really good shorthand then for you to refer back to when the project is being made, for you to evaluate work against, or for you to tell a colleague what the project is. And there's a neat trick you can use to arrive at your brief in brief. That means you don't have to do any more work. So what you do is you stick an active verb together with your target audience, together with your objective, together with your key message. Active verb, audience, aim, key message. So with our ginger shot, encourage stressed out urban professionals to sample our ginger shot because it's the quick, healthy way to beat fatigue. Boom, there you have it. Your brief in a single sentence, arrived at by this really easy to use formula. The sunshine's gone in Wales, alas. I knew it wouldn't last very long. I am going to talk to you in a second about the difference between the brief and the briefing, and there is a big difference. But before we do that, I wanted to let you know that if you have enjoyed this or found it vaguely useful, I'm doing another one, which is all about how to prepare and structure, thank you, Kevin, and deliver a winning pitch. And it's on Friday, the April the 12th at 1 p.m. Am I going to share a link to sign up? No, yes, I'll do that. I'll share that now, and you can click on that and sign up. Is that self-defeating? I don't know. Come back once you've signed up. Right. Here's another thing. So the way I make my living is through creative coaching largely. The writing I do rarely pays. So I do masterclasses in person or virtually for teams. And I do masterclasses on all kinds of things. This is part of a half-day workshop on writing briefs. I do stuff on having better ideas, giving feedback, pitching, copywriting, all this stuff. So I'm going to put out a handout. Oops, no, I'm not. Handout, this handout there. If you're curious about my masterclasses, you can find out more in this document. And please, if you know anybody, another organization who might be interested, do share this with them. Teenage children are expensive. Let's talk now about the briefing process. So before you even begin writing the brief, it can be really helpful to talk to your creatives. Understand their experience of the product or brand, where they think the challenges and opportunities might be. But once the brief is written, you don't go changing it. You know, that's kind of like a contract then. You've done all the thinking and it shouldn't move. If you can have a briefing meeting. So Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of Le Petit Prince, said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And I think that's really nice. So you have a brief and you have a briefing. So the brief, as we've established, is a written document. It's verbal, it's concise, and it's fixed. The briefing is a meeting, and that's all spoken. It's visual, so you use lots of imagery. It's really open. It's all about the different directions you could go in, and it's interactive. You know, you have the creatives and designers, whoever's going to work on it, sat in a room with you, and you really talk about it. And these two things together are really great and work really well in a complementary way. So the brief is the minimum relevant information people need to embark on the task, and the briefing is the maximum relevant information. And if you get these two right, then it's a really, really potent mix. Of course, you can't do it for everything, you know, and the sort of work-a-day regular projects, you can't do this. But the bigger brand building, launches, rebrands, you know, all this kind of stuff, you should do it. And it looks a bit like this. I always feel like my colors work quite nicely here. So the brief is in the middle there. The briefing is just a bit bigger and broader outside, and then there is the pink universe of creativity or something. If there are pitfalls or dead ends, the briefing meeting is a good time to let the creatives know. So once the brief is briefed, make it a touchstone for every conversation you have about the project. So when you go to see a rough cut, or when you're providing feedback, begin with the brief, the briefing brief. It allows you to keep feedback objective and constructive and stops people going off into their own opinions. But do keep an open mind. Some of you will remember the Guinness Surfer ad. It's been voted the UK's favourite commercial of all time. And it's about a guy waiting for the perfect wave. And it's shot in black and white, like Guinness is black and white. On that brief, which went to the agency file, it said, the Guinness extended pour time shouldn't be mentioned, as the dwell may well be a potential barrier to a younger demographic. So you know when you order a pint of Guinness, I could really murder a pint of Guinness right now. It is Friday though, isn't it? When they pour the pint, they leave it to settle, you know, they put it aside, they get the rest of the order, and then they go back and they top up the Guinness. Guinness says, we don't want to mention this because it's going to put people off. But the agency said, look, this is the thing that makes your product different. And isn't it true that in modern life, we're so harassed that actually things that take time feel good and are important? Therefore, let's make an ad about surfing. And sometimes, because creativity is unpredictable and magical and mysterious, the creatives will come up with something brilliant that doesn't quite sit with the brief. And that is okay, you know, that's when you've got to use your nous and your insights and your experience to go, this is actually a really great idea that is going to be effective, and it doesn't gel with the brief, but I can see that this is even greater than anything I envisaged when I was writing the brief. This is my sort of gesture as a creative in this presentation. to make a shout out for the magic of creativity. So creative can sometimes drive strategy. Jack says, yeah, absolutely. You know, I think strategy is kind of in some regards, it's a creative process in itself, you know, the decisions you have to take. But really what I'm saying here is not so much that creative can drive strategy, it's just that sometimes out of nowhere, this genius creative idea arrives, and once you analyze it, you go, actually, there is a strategy there that does make sense. Good things come to those who wait. In summary, it's 10 to 2, and I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. No Bernie, no Elton. You need Bernie, Elton does. Identify your who, what, and why. What are those 3 critical things? Most importantly, why? Why should anybody give a fuck? Go easy on the how. We don't need to tell the creatives how they're going to achieve this. You're attempting to motivate people, not demographics. If your creative team could have written the brief themselves, then you need to spend more time thinking. If the brief could be true for a competitor brand, then you need to spend more time thinking too. So once you've written a brief, think of your closest competitor, stick their logo on the top. If the brief could work for them, it's not distinctive enough for you. Is your single-minded proposition single-minded? Is your brief rooted in a well-observed truth? Does every word count? Have you written with ambition, passion, and conviction? Above all, is your brief simple, inspiring, and true? Whew, there we go. So that film that I mentioned, it's called Briefly, and it is quite brief. It's last time I looked, it was on Vimeo. So it's a lot of ad guys, and they're all guys, I think. But there's some nice observations about the briefing process. I have a book. Some of you may have read my book. Has anybody read my book? Has anybody bought my book but not read it? I don't know. Yes, thank you, John. Yes. Eleanor, yes. Oh, excellent. Thanks, guys. Yeah, my book's out there. You know, buy it. I refer you to my earlier comment about teenagers. My website is richardholman.com. Please take a look there. You'll find blog articles and stuff about one-to-one coaching if you'd like me to work with you to enhance your creativity or creative process, as well as the master classes. Thank you, Angus. I will sign it, Nikki, next time I see you. I'm on Instagram at Richard Holman, _creativity. I am on the platform formerly known as X, Richard _Holman. And I am on YouTube and TikTok as the Creative Coach. I'm giving a session next week on 360 innovation and social. So I'm trying to get my TikTok numbers up. Follow me on TikTok. Veronica's just started following me. Thank you, Veronica. I'm also on LinkedIn. Finally, very last thing before your questions. You never know, you might get lucky. Your brief might become a billboard in itself. This was for Adult Swim. It's an email. The email of the brief printed out large. We need a billboard to tell people Adult Swim is on HBO Max. Small in the lower corner, Adult Swim logo above HBO Max logo. Sometimes the brief can become the creative. Thank you, my friends, for attending, and thank you for sticking around too, and thank you for all the comments in the chat. I like doing these, you know. There's a sense of community about it, I think, and that's a good thing. We need more community these days. Thank you, guys. I have time for some questions. I will share this recording both to you and the people who said they were coming and didn't come. Oh, thank you, guys. That's really nice. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes. If anybody wants to ask me a question about anything, ask me a question about anything. Are Leeds going to beat Huddersfield tomorrow? Alexander, I feel the inspiring part of the brief is somewhat sacred, fragile, and not to be shared with and destroyed by the client. Still, some clients insist on seeing and approving the creative brief. How would you handle such a situation? That's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, my approach generally is to be as collaborative as possible. You now, and I like to take everybody along on the journey. And if I were in a situation where I felt the clients would disapprove of some aspect of the brief, I think there might be an issue with our strategic and creative thinking not aligning, which went kind of deeper than the brief. But taking your question at face value, I would respectfully explain to the client that this is the way of motivating our creatives, and so long as they agree with the essence of it, they resist the temptation to fiddle with the execution. Emma says, I recently worked with a client to write a creative brief. It was fairly short, maybe 2 pages max, but then presented over 12 pages in a PDF with lots of imagery, etc. Do you think that level of presentation is helpful or distracting? Great question, Emma, and I think this is this goes back to what I was saying about a brief and a briefing meeting. So brief should be really compact and succinct and really simple on one page if possible. It's this sort of, you know, thing that's been beautifully thought out and really well crafted. And then in the briefing meeting, once everybody's read the brief and looked at it, you then have a conversation about the issues arising, about observations, and then you would share some of the imagery that you thought could be pertinent. But I'd give people time with the brief as a single document to begin with before putting the other stuff on. And as your question implies, often people chuck all the stuff together and they get a bit of a muddle and it gets a bit confusing. Stefania says, can we hear your Marmite and wedding story? I've very briefly, my wife was into Marmite when we got together, and I wasn't into Marmite. But you know, because I was in love with her, I thought it was, you know, a nice thing for her, and so I got a special edition Marmite jar with a silver lid, and I engraved the question on the top. And we were on holiday. I was working actually in New York, and the way I proposed was I went to a fancy downtown restaurant in advance. I gave them the Marmite jar, special Marmite jar, and I asked them to bring it out with "Will you marry me?" and Marmite on the plate, and they did, and that was how I proposed, and it was lovely. And then we thought it'd be really nice to carry that on for the wedding, so we decided we were going to send out the wedding invites in Marmite jars. So redesigned the Marmite label so it said wedding, and then put the you know, the info inside. And my wife sat at home while I was working with our eldest in the bath, who was only a baby at the time, and washed out all the Marmite jars. But she put the Marmite in a bucket. She had a big bucket of Marmite in our new house. And one night when we were asleep, the Marmite tipped over, ran down the wall. And when I came into the kitchen in the morning, it was like bubbling across the floor, like a you know, 60s B movie. And it was like it was alive. And it really smelled, and it was nuts. And in the end, we had to I took the radiator off to try and clean the wall, but we couldn't get rid of the smell, and we had to knock the internal wall of the kitchen down. Yeah, that's the Marmite story. And do you know what? I actually quite like Marmite now. So exposure, I guess, is the thing. Indeed, it was dramatic. Yeah. Anybody else got one more question before we go? The Blob, yeah. Yeah, it was too much Marmite, Anna, absolutely. Any more questions before we go? If not, I will say goodbye. So yeah, come along, please, on April the 12th. And if you'd like to hire me to come in and do this kind of thing where you work, or if you know what, I've got some, I'm just finishing some creative coaching as well. So I have some one-to-ones available too. Any good resources for creative inspiration? Kai, man, yeah, all these. What's a good resource for creative inspiration? Well, my newsletter is a good one. And I think one of the best books on creativity that's come out in the past couple of years is not mine. although that's one of them, obviously. But it's the Rick Rubin book, The Creative Act, which is that one there. It's a brilliant, brilliant book about the creative process. Nam wanted to know how to push back on a bad brief. How to push back on a bad brief. I think it is to gently explain that the more single-minded we can be, the more successful the creative is likely to be. And if there are inconsistencies or there is too much in that brief, to ask through questions, I think, is probably the least combative way of doing it. Who are we really talking to? What are we telling them? And why do we think they should care? And what is the one most important thing we should be saying? And try and do this in a light, gentle, conversational way. And then once you have those answers, compare them against the brief and say, well, in that case, maybe we could drop this and maybe we could amplify that. Sometimes what I've done is I have rewritten the brief, but in 2 or 3 sentences, and I share it back with the client. So I'm not rewriting their brief, but I'm saying I've distilled it down into what I think is the essence of it. And then I show them that sentence and I say, do you agree with this? And if they do, they think, wow, this is great. You know, Richard really understands my brand and my problem. And if they say, no, that's not quite right, then you get more information that helps you get to the bottom of it. Peter says, you seem very zen. Thank you, Peter. How do you keep chill in the hyper world of ad creativity? I run a lot. Well, I've broken my foot at the moment, so I'm not running. Fractured my foot a month ago, but I spend a lot of time outdoors in the mountains. I listen to music and I read books. And I guess I'm now 51. I've been around long enough to know that none of this really matters. You know, there are some things in life that really, really matter, and we all know what those are. But advertising briefs are important, but you know, they really aren't the be all and end all. And knowing that helps me stay chill. Thank you, everybody. I am going to go. You need to go. You need to go have a beer, have a walk, or a nice cup of tea, or go and do some work. So take care, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. If you can, spread the word about my endeavours if you're at all keen on them. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.